Hello, Muslim friends in the world. The Vatican was quiet that evening, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees in the nearby gardens. In the heart of the Vatican, Paus Francis stood alone in the dimly lit room, gazing out the window at the dark sky. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the world itself was holding its breath. This was the moment, the decision he had known would change everything. He had spent years pondering this moment, knowing that it would either mark the beginning of a new era or bring about devastating consequences for the Church and its followers. Paus Francis had come to realize that the message of peace and love he had always preached went far beyond the teachings of Christianity. And he had learned that the man who had shaped so much of history, who had brought a message of peace and mercy to a vast portion of the world, had been misunderstood: Muhammad. Paus Francis, always known for his humility and openness to dialogue with others, had come to believe that the world needed to hear this truth. Muhammad was not a figure to be feared, but a brother in faith. And that was the message he intended to share with the world. But the road ahead was treacherous. There was a deep divide between religions, and within the Church itself, his decision would not be met with welcome. Many would see it as a betrayal, a disruption of the delicate balance that had been maintained for centuries. It was a gamble, one that could either bring people together or tear them apart. As Paus Francis paced the room, his thoughts wandered to his previous meetings with various religious leaders over the years. The conversations about peace, about tolerance, and about understanding had always been meaningful, but they had always been just that, conversations. He knew that now the time for mere dialogue had passed. The time had come to take a stand. Do I really have the strength to do this? He wondered aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Can I bear the consequences? Suddenly, the door to his private study creaked open, and a figure stepped into the room. It was Sister Maria, the quiet and devoted nun who had been with him since the early days of his papacy. Her presence was always calming, and yet, in that moment, Paus Francis could see the worry in her eyes. "Papa Susi," she began hesitantly, "are you certain about this decision? We know how much it will shake the Church, how much it will affect the lives of so many people. You're not just speaking for yourself now, you're speaking for millions. This could break them." Paus Francis turned toward her, his expression soft but resolute. "I understand the risks, Maria," he said, "but I have to do this. The truth must be told, no matter how painful it may be. Muhammad taught love and peace, just as Jesus did. The world needs to hear that." Sister Maria's voice trembled slightly as she spoke again. "But, Papa, the consequences, the Church, the world, it will tear us apart. How can we say these things? The world isn't ready for this kind of truth." Paus Francis walked toward her and placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "The world may not be ready," he said softly, "but sometimes change must come from the most unexpected places. I've spent my life preaching love, Sister Maria. I've spent my life urging others to see past their differences. Now I must walk the walk, and if I am to truly lead, I cannot shy away from the truth." Sister Maria nodded slowly, though her heart was heavy with doubt. "I understand, Papa Susi, but you're right. This will change everything." He gazed at the window once more, the dark clouds gathering in the sky, as though echoing the storm that was about to break. He had no illusions about what would happen next. He knew that he would be branded a heretic by many, even by some of his closest allies. But he had come to understand that this was not about him. This was about something far greater than the Church or any one individual. It was about healing the rift that had existed for centuries between Christianity and Islam. A rift that had caused so much suffering, division, and hatred. The message was clear in his heart. Muhammad, like Jesus, had been a man of peace and mercy, and the world needed to see that truth. Paus Francis took a deep breath and reached for a small envelope on the desk in front of him. Inside, a letter he had carefully written over the past weeks. A letter that would change everything. With a steady hand, he placed it in a folder, ready to be delivered. "We are not alone in this journey," he whispered to himself. "Muhammad, Jesus, both men of peace. We must learn to see beyond our differences and come together in the name of love." As the evening passed, the weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. Paus Francis knew that the storm was just beginning, but he also knew that his calling was clear. This was the path he had to walk, no matter the consequences. Tomorrow he would stand before the world and speak the truth. And he would do so with the conviction of a man who had spent his life seeking peace, no matter how difficult it may be. This was the beginning of a journey that would change not only the Catholic Church but the entire world. What would the world think of Paus Francis' revelation? Would they see him as a visionary, or would they condemn him as a traitor to the faith? Only time would tell. The dawn had barely broken over the Vatican, but already the buzz of anticipation had begun to spread. It was a quiet morning, yet the streets of Rome were alive with whispers. News of Paus Francis's controversial decision had leaked to the public the night before. The world's media had already caught wind of the momentous announcement, though many still weren't fully aware of the gravity of what was about to unfold. Inside the Vatican, however, the situation was anything but quiet. Cardinal Angelo had called an emergency meeting with a select group of advisors and officials. The tension in the room was palpable. Every face was etched with worry. The cardinals were not only worried about the theological implications of Paus Francis's decision, but also the very survival of the Church as an institution. "You must understand," Cardinal Angelo began, his voice trembling with urgency. "The world is not ready for this. If we allow this to happen, we risk fracturing the unity of the faithful. The fallout from this announcement will be catastrophic." Paus Francis, sitting at the head of the long table, listened in silence. He had expected this reaction, but hearing the urgency in Angelo's voice only confirmed his fears. The world was not prepared for what he was about to say, but that was exactly why he had to say it. "We have lived too long in fear," Paus Francis responded softly, yet with an undeniable authority. "Fear of the unknown, fear of the other. But we cannot continue to teach division in the name of God. Our faith calls us to love, to unite, to bridge the gap between brothers and sisters of different faiths." The room fell silent. No one spoke for several moments. Paus Francis's words echoed in their minds. His resolve was unmistakable. He had made up his mind, and there was no turning back. "Yes, Papa Susi," said Cardinal Thomas, a more conservative figure in the room, his voice tinged with frustration. "But you are asking us to accept something radical, to believe that Muhammad, a man who was not even a Christian, shares the same message of peace as Jesus Christ? This is sacrilege. It's unthinkable." Paus Francis met Cardinal Thomas's gaze, his eyes filled with unwavering conviction. "We have spent centuries building walls between us, hiding behind our differences. Muhammad was a messenger of peace, just as Jesus was. They shared the same message of love, of compassion for all humanity. This is not sacrilege. This is the truth." The other cardinals exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked as though they wanted to speak up, but others remained silent, unsure of how to respond. "I have spoken with many Muslim leaders," Paus Francis continued, his voice growing more passionate. "I have seen the same kindness, the same yearning for peace that we strive for in our own faith. They are not our enemies. They are our brothers and sisters." Sister Maria, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, now stepped forward. Her eyes were filled with concern, but also with a deep understanding of what Paus Francis was trying to achieve. "Papa Susi," she said softly, "I know your heart, and I know your desire for peace, but you must be prepared for the consequences. We are not only challenging the beliefs of the Church, we are challenging centuries of deep-rooted animosity. People will not understand. They will see this as an attack on the very foundations of our faith." Paus Francis sighed, his face softened with empathy. "I understand, Maria. I know the road will be difficult, and that some will not accept this message. But the truth must be spoken. I am not denying our faith. I am not saying that Christianity is the only way to salvation. What I am saying is that we must recognize that all paths to God are valid, that love is the foundation of all faiths, including Islam." There was a long pause in the room. The cardinals, unable to counter Paus Francis's conviction, exchanged wary looks. There was no denying that his words had power. But could they stand by him? Could they support this message, knowing the chaos it would bring? Outside, the streets of Rome were filled with anxious chatter. The news had spread quickly. The people were divided. Some felt hope and optimism, believing that the message of unity and peace was exactly what the world needed. Others were shocked, angered, even terrified. To many, Paus Francis's words seemed like an affront to the very core of their beliefs. In the days that followed, the reactions grew louder. A prominent conservative Catholic organization in the United States issued a statement condemning Paus Francis's decision. They accused him of betraying the faith, of undermining the authority of the Church. They even called for a schism within the Church. In the Middle East, Islamic leaders responded with cautious optimism. Some praised the Paus for his courage in speaking out about unity, while others felt deeply offended, believing that Paus Francis's message could be a form of Christian encroachment on Islamic territory. Many began to fear that Paus Francis's attempt at unity might only widen the divide between the two faiths. Meanwhile, the Vatican remained a tense place. Paus Francis's advisors continued to debate behind closed doors, but the Pope had made his decision. The announcement would be made in a public address to the world, and there was no turning back. He would stand before the world and tell the truth, no matter the cost. That evening, Paus Francis stood before the mirror in his private chamber, adjusting the white robe that had become synonymous with his papacy. His reflection seemed to stare back at him with a mixture of resolve and doubt. He had never felt more alone, yet he knew that the path he had chosen was the right one. "Tomorrow, the world will know the truth," Paus Francis whispered to himself. "Tomorrow, we will take the first step toward peace." The next day, the Vatican had prepared for a live broadcast, a sermon like no other. The world's eyes were on Rome, on Paus Francis. As the moment drew near, Sister Maria stood by his side, offering her final words of encouragement. "You are not alone, Papa Susi," she said quietly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "We may face hardships, but we will face them together." Paus Francis turned to her, offering a gentle smile. "Together, Maria, always." And with that, the doors of the chapel opened, and Paus Francis stepped into the light, ready to address the world. The day of the announcement had arrived. The Vatican Square was bustling with excitement, though a nervous energy hung in the air. Thousands of pilgrims from around the world gathered, all eager to witness what Paus Francis had promised would be a monumental speech. The world's media was also ready, with cameras trained on the grand facade of St. Peter's Basilica. Everyone knew something significant was about to unfold, but no one was sure just how much it would change the course of history. Inside the Vatican, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. Paus Francis stood in front of the ornate mirror in his private chamber, adjusting his white robe. Sister Maria entered quietly, her footsteps soft on the marble floor. She had been by his side through every decision, every moment of doubt. Today, she knew the weight of the choice Paus Francis had made. "Are you ready, Bapa Susi?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with concern. Paus Francis turned to her, offering a small, knowing smile. "Maria, I've been ready for this moment my entire life. It's not about readiness anymore. It's about truth, about justice, about showing the world that peace is the only path forward." She nodded, but the worry in her eyes was evident. "The world isn't ready for this, you know. There will be protests, violence, perhaps even calls to remove you from office. But I know you, Bapa. I know your heart. You've chosen the right path." He took a deep breath and walked towards the balcony overlooking the square, where a sea of faces waited expectantly. "I hope I have chosen the right path, but even if I haven't, I must still follow it, no matter the cost." As he stepped out onto the balcony, a hushed silence descended over the vast crowd below. People from all over the world had gathered, some hopeful, others apprehensive. But all knew that what Paus Francis was about to say would reshape not only their faith but the very foundation of global relations. Paus Francis raised his hands in a gesture of peace, and the crowd fell completely silent, their eyes locked on him. The world was watching. He could feel the weight of history bearing down on his shoulders. "My dear brothers and sisters," Paus Francis began, his voice clear and steady, "I stand before you today with a heart full of both sorrow and hope. Sorrow, because I know that the path I must walk will not be easy. Hope, because I believe with all my heart that this path will bring us closer to the unity we so desperately need." There was a pause as Paus Francis collected his thoughts. The world was waiting. "For centuries," he continued, "we have been divided by religion, by hatred, by misunderstanding. We have been taught to fear one another, to see each other as enemies. But I stand before you today to tell you that we have been wrong." A murmur rippled through the crowd as people exchanged confused glances. They were not sure what to expect, but the tension was palpable. Paus Francis's words were already challenging everything they had believed. "I have spent years in dialogue with leaders of different faiths, and I have come to realize that the message of peace is not exclusive to Christianity. The message of peace and love that we hold dear in our hearts is also the message of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam," Paus Francis declared, his voice unwavering. The response from the crowd was immediate and intense. Some were stunned into silence, while others began to whisper among themselves. There were murmurs of disbelief, of outrage, and even some applause from those who understood the significance of what had been said. The news cameras around the world were focused, capturing every reaction, every shift in expression. Paus Francis raised his hand again, calling for silence. "I understand the shock and confusion that many of you may feel," he said softly. "But the truth is, both Jesus and Muhammad preached the same message of love, of peace, and of mercy. They were both servants of God, both striving to bring humanity closer to the divine through their teachings." He paused, letting his words sink in, before continuing. "We cannot afford to continue the cycle of hatred and division. We cannot afford to keep building walls between us. We are all children of God, and we must see each other as brothers and sisters, regardless of our differences. Our faiths may differ, but the message of love and peace is universal." The reaction from the crowd was split. Some were visibly moved by Paus Francis's words, their eyes filled with tears. Others, however, were shaking their heads, unable to accept such a radical shift in doctrine. The implications were enormous. Many feared that Paus Francis had gone too far, that he was undermining the core beliefs of the Catholic Church. The international news outlets were quick to pick up the story. Headlines across the globe read, Pope Francis declares Muhammad and Jesus share the same message of peace. The shockwaves reverberated through the global community. In the United States, conservative Catholic organizations denounced Pope Francis as a heretic, calling for his resignation. Protests erupted outside churches and in various cities, with angry demonstrators holding signs that read, "Paus is a traitor to Christ and no room for heresy in the Church." In the Middle East, Islamic leaders expressed mixed reactions. Some embraced Pope Francis's message, praising him for his courage in speaking about unity, while others felt insulted, interpreting his words as an attempt to blur the lines between Christianity and Islam. The tension between the two religions only seemed to grow. Despite the storm that was gathering, Pope Francis remained calm and resolute. He knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was prepared to face whatever came. Later that evening, as the crowds began to disperse, Sister Maria approached him in the quiet of his study. "Papa Susi," she said, her voice gentle, "how do you feel now, after everything that's happened today?" Pope Francis looked up at her, his eyes tired but filled with a deep sense of peace. "I feel lighter," he replied. "I've spoken the truth. I've done what I was called to do. Now it's up to the world to decide what to do with it." He stood up, walking towards the window and looking out at the evening sky. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of history lifting from his shoulders. "The world will change," he whispered to himself, "one step at a time." The days following Pope Francis's speech were filled with turbulence. The announcement that had shaken the foundations of global faith was not one that could easily be forgotten. As the world absorbed the implications of his words, the Pope found himself at the center of an escalating storm. In Rome, the Vatican's inner sanctum buzzed with urgent discussions. Cardinal Angelo and other high-ranking members of the Curia had convened yet again, this time to discuss the fallout from Pope Francis's bold declaration. The atmosphere was heavy with tension as the cardinals struggled to reconcile their loyalty to the Pope with the ever-growing outrage from both within and outside the Church. "We cannot pretend this is a simple misunderstanding," Cardinal Angelo stated, his voice tight with frustration. "The faithful are already in an uproar. Our authority is being questioned in ways I've never witnessed before. The media is portraying us as weak, as divided. We are being attacked from all sides." Pope Francis, sitting at the head of the table, remained calm but weary. He had anticipated this backlash. He had known that his actions would ignite a firestorm, but he had also known that this was a necessary step. His belief in the message of peace between Christianity and Islam had not wavered, even if the world around him seemed to be crumbling under the weight of his words. "I understand your concerns," Pope Francis said, his voice measured, "but we cannot allow fear to dictate our actions. The truth I spoke is not negotiable. We cannot continue to live in a world where we divide ourselves based on misconceptions and hatred. I know the cost of what I've said, but I stand by it." Cardinal Thomas, the most conservative among them, slammed his fist on the table. "This is not the way. We cannot condone such heresy. You speak of unity, but what you have done is fracture the very soul of our faith. Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior. To compare him with Muhammad is an insult." Pope Francis closed his eyes, taking a slow, deep breath. He had expected this resistance, but it did not make it any easier to endure. Jesus and Muhammad were both men of peace, both called to show the world a higher way of living. "We must stop looking at our differences and start focusing on what unites us," he replied, his voice steady but firm. The debate continued for hours, but no resolution was reached. Pope Francis knew the path he had chosen was not one of comfort. The storm had only just begun. Meanwhile, across the world, the impact of Pope Francis's words was being felt. In the United States, fervent Catholic groups were organizing protests, calling for the Pope to step down. Banners reading "heretic" and "unfit to lead" were seen outside churches in cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. A growing movement to undermine the Pope's leadership had gained traction among the conservative factions of the Catholic Church, and public calls for a new papal election were growing louder each day. The response from Islamic leaders was equally mixed. Some applauded Pope Francis for his courage and openness to recognizing the shared message of peace between their faiths. But others, particularly in conservative Islamic countries, viewed his statement as a veiled attempt to merge Christianity and Islam, something they saw as a dangerous undermining of their own faith. Some leaders called for a public retraction, while others criticized Pope Francis for failing to fully recognize the fundamental differences between their religions. In the Middle East, a group of influential imams in Egypt called for a summit with Christian leaders to address the Pope's controversial remarks. They expressed a willingness to engage in dialogue, but also made it clear that they would not accept any attempts to diminish the unique significance of Muhammad's prophethood. As the days passed, the diplomatic and religious fallout from Pope Francis's statement spread. There were reports of protests in various Muslim-majority countries, particularly in parts of Africa and the Middle East. Some protests turned violent, with clashes between demonstrators and local authorities. The Vatican was under siege, not just physically but ideologically. In Rome, Pope Francis had a quiet moment of reflection late one night in his private chapel. The candles flickered around him, casting long shadows on the walls. He knelt in prayer, seeking the guidance of God, asking for the strength to endure the storm that he had set in motion. "Lord, I have spoken the truth," he whispered, "and now the world must hear it no matter the cost. Give me the courage to stand firm in my conviction. Give me the wisdom to navigate this turmoil. And may we all come together in your name, for you are the only true path to peace." Sister Maria, who had been standing quietly at the back of the chapel, walked up to him. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but full of concern. "Papa Susi, I know this is hard. I see the toll it's taking on you, but I believe in what you are doing. The world needs this truth, and so do we. You are not alone in this." Pope Francis looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Maria. Your support means more to me than you know." But even as he found comfort in his faith and in the support of those closest to him, he knew that the most difficult challenges were still ahead. The backlash was growing louder, and there was no telling how far it would go. The path of unity that he had chosen seemed increasingly distant, replaced by an overwhelming tide of opposition. Back in the United States, Catholic leaders were scrambling to address the growing crisis. A group of prominent bishops had called for a special meeting in the Vatican, planning to discuss what they called the crisis of faith that Pope Francis had created. The meeting was set to take place in just a few weeks, but rumors of an impending rebellion were already circulating. Some bishops were even rumored to be preparing for a public statement denouncing the Pope's teachings, calling for a reformation within the Catholic Church. At the same time, Pope Francis knew that his message of peace could not afford to be silenced. The Pope had promised that his words would heal divisions, but the truth was that the healing process would be painful and long. The challenge was no longer just about theological debate. It was about surviving the storm that was now upon him and trying to emerge on the other side with his vision of unity intact. As the weeks passed, the global controversy surrounding Pope Francis's message of peace only intensified. The Vatican, once a symbol of unwavering tradition and authority, had become a battleground of ideologies. The Pope's courage in speaking out for unity between Islam and Christianity had sparked a wave of both admiration and outrage. Now, the question remained, Could the Church survive the storm it had unleashed? And could Pope Francis continue to lead with his vision of a world united in love and peace? Inside the Vatican, the mood had shifted. No longer were the discussions confined to the quiet chambers of the Curia. The debates had spilled into the streets of Rome, into the media, and into the hearts of millions of people around the world. The Pope's message of peace had struck a chord with many, but it had also caused deep divisions that seemed almost impossible to bridge. Cardinal Angelo, once a strong supporter of Pope Francis, had become more and more distant. He had always believed in the Pope's vision for a more compassionate and inclusive church, but the fallout had begun to wear on him. His once confident demeanor was now marked with uncertainty as he met privately with the other cardinals. "The Pope has created a crisis," Cardinal Angelo confessed in a meeting with a few select members of the Curia. "The faithful are disillusioned, and some are already talking of a schism. The divisions are growing every day. We are witnessing the very fabric of the Church unraveling." "Cardinal Angelo, we must acknowledge the reality," Cardinal Thomas added grimly. "There is no easy way out of this. Pope Francis's words are controversial at best and heretical at worst. The divisions he's created are not just theological, they are spiritual. They touch the very core of what we believe." "But what of the vision Pope Francis has set before us?" another cardinal asked. "A church that unites people in peace, regardless of faith? Isn't that the message of Christ himself? The way forward may be painful, but can we truly ignore the call to love and understanding?" The room grew quiet. The cardinals, though divided, knew that they were at a crossroads. The Church's leadership had to decide whether they would rally behind Pope Francis's message of unity or whether they would reject it and attempt to restore the old ways. Meanwhile, Pope Francis sat in his private study, staring out the window at the sprawling Vatican gardens. The weight of the world seemed to press down on him. The controversy, the threats, the divisions, they had all taken a toll on his health. He had spent countless hours in prayer, seeking solace and strength, but there were still moments of doubt, moments when the path ahead seemed almost too difficult to bear. Sister Maria entered quietly, as she had done so many times before, offering a quiet comfort in his times of need. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but filled with resolve. "Papa Susi, you've already made history. Your words have already begun to change the world. You cannot let the backlash overwhelm you. The message you spoke was one of love, of peace. That is a message worth fighting for." Pope Francis turned to her, his eyes tired but still full of conviction. "Maria, I never imagined it would come to this. I thought that speaking the truth would bring us closer together, but instead, it seems to have divided us even more. The forces against this message are powerful. People are angry, frightened." "I know," Maria said gently, "but isn't that what Christ faced? Opposition, misunderstanding, even betrayal. But he stood firm in his mission, and so must you. The road ahead will be long, but you must remember that your faith is unshakable. And with that, so too is the truth you speak." Pope Francis took a deep breath, finding solace in her words. "Perhaps you're right. The road will be long, but I cannot turn back now. The message of unity and peace, this is the path that God has set before me, and it is a path worth walking." The days continued to pass, and the world continued to react. Protests in various countries began to take on a new intensity. In the United States, the debate within the Catholic community reached a boiling point. Catholic leaders in some dioceses openly challenged Pope Francis, and there were calls for a council to discuss his teachings. Some bishops and cardinals openly denounced the Pope's message as a betrayal of the faith, calling for a return to traditional Catholic teachings. Others, however, stood by Pope Francis, supporting his call for unity and peace between Christianity and Islam. In the Middle East, tensions continued to rise. Muslim leaders who had previously expressed cautious optimism now began to question Pope Francis's sincerity. Some felt that his message was being distorted, while others saw it as an opportunity to further promote interfaith dialogue. Pope Francis, however, remained steadfast. Despite the growing tension, he continued to reach out to religious leaders from around the world. He sent personal letters to Muslim leaders, inviting them to a summit in Rome, where he hoped to continue his vision of interfaith dialogue and unity. He believed that through conversation, understanding, and shared commitment to peace, the world could heal from the wounds of division. The Vatican, once a place of ceremonial grandeur, had become a place of intense negotiations and strategic decisions. Pope Francis, though under immense pressure, refused to back down. He knew that what he had started was not just a theological debate. It was a movement for peace, a movement for love, and a movement that transcended religious boundaries. One evening, after a particularly trying day of meetings, Pope Francis found himself in the chapel once again. He knelt before the altar, his heart heavy with the weight of the decisions he had made. But even in his solitude, he felt a deep sense of purpose. "Lord," he whispered in the quiet of the chapel, "I have spoken your truth. I have done what I believe is right. And though the world may reject it, I trust in your plan. Guide me, strengthen me, and let me never lose sight of the mission you have given me." Sister Maria entered the chapel, offering him a reassuring smile. "Papa Susi, there are still many who stand with you. Your message of peace and unity is not one that will be forgotten. It will endure, even through the darkest of times." Pope Francis stood, looking toward the cross, his eyes filled with quiet resolve. "The road ahead may be uncertain, but I am not alone. And as long as I have faith, I know the truth will prevail." With that, he turned toward the world waiting outside the Vatican, ready to face the challenges ahead, knowing that the fight for peace, the fight for love, was worth every sacrifice.